So I'm going to talk about Alexei Navalny, and as I talk about his story, you're going to understand how the Russian story really plays out in a meaningful way. The corruption that's endemic in Russia and how Putin has kind of stacked the decks with his oligarchs. So let's do this. I'm going to talk about him briefly just to give a little bit about his biography, and then we'll watch a couple of videos, and then I'll link it to the kangaroos. Okay, so Navalny is a Russian opposition leader, lawyer, and an anti-corruption activist. He has organized anti-government demonstrations and run for office to advocate reforms against corruption in Russia and even against Vladimir Putin. Okay, now that doesn't go over very well in an authoritarian regime, but he's pulled it off. And even though the people tend to be pretty depoliticized, he's somehow been able to summon some moral indignation from them. As of 2021, Navalny had more than 6 million YouTube subscribers. Through his social media channels, he and his team have published material about corruption in Russia, organized political demonstrations, and promoted his campaigns. In 2013, he received a suspended sentence for embezzlement. So they charged him with embezzlement to kind of move him off so that he couldn't be a pain. And now, with that hangs over him, and okay, nevertheless, he was allowed to run in the 2013 Moscow mayoral election, and he came in second with 27% of the vote, outperforming expectations, but losing to the incumbent mayor, who was a Putin appointee. So in December 2014, Navalny received another suspended sentence for that same embezzlement, but both of these criminal cases were widely considered to be politically motivated and intended to bar him from running in future elections. So they're trying to destroy him from being able to be more of a thorn in their flesh. Navalny launched his presidential campaign in 2018, but he was barred by Russia's Central Election Commission after registering due to his prior criminal conviction. So they removed him from being a direct threat to Putin in that sense. In August 2020, Navalny was hospitalized in a serious condition after being poisoned with a nerve agent. He was medically evacuated to Berlin and discharged a month later. Navalny accused Putin of being responsible for his poisoning, and an investigation implicated agents from the FSB. Okay, so that's his background. So this is a short Vox documentary. I'll put the link below, but I'm only going to show a couple minutes of it. And here's how Putin's regime actually worked.
Politician Alexei Navalny was shooting this campaign video. He was in Siberia, one of the many places where in about 3 weeks there would be local and regional elections. But he wasn't running for office. He was urging people to vote out the ruling party, United Russia, led by the President Vladimir Putin.
Мы с вами разберем, как можно победить эту ненасытную жабу, партию «Единая Россия». И до тех пор, пока мы от них не избавимся, шансов на нормальную жизнь у нас нет.
He's made many videos like this before, and they usually rack up millions of views.
But it's not going to go well for you when you challenge Putin in the way that he has. Now, how has Putin made his name?
Previously, Putin had been a spy in the Soviet KGB and head of the Russian security service, roles that shaped how he wanted to govern as president.
So he was trying to remake Russia in the image of the KGB. Like if everything in the world could be as centralized, insular, and secretive as the KGB, it would work well.
So in order to maximize his control, Putin surrounded himself with the most powerful elements in Russia, starting with the media.
Now, this is what you need to understand about how Russia actually works and why the people are so beat down. They're not getting the information, and the information that they're getting is corrupted, and there's powers that are far stronger than them, and they know it. So let's keep watching.
Police were sent into Russia's independent media companies, charging their owners and bringing newsrooms under state control. This hid Putin's actions from the public, so he was
And it's only gotten worse since the war in Ukraine began, where there are even more controls that have been put in place to monitor what people could or could not say. It's a special military operation, it's not a war, you can't say this, or we're going to close your newspaper down, and some have fled abroad.
He was able to go after another powerful element, Russia's elections. His regime manipulated who could run for office, and that typically meant Putin's party and a few fake candidates, sanctioned by the regime. This was designed to splinter the opposition vote. But politicians weren't the only threat to Putin. He also went after Russia's oligarchs and their prominent friends to weed out some powerful critics.
and he made sure that he supplied himself with a loyal base of oligarchs so that he would be insulated from what could come toward him.
In the early 2000s, most of Russia's wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few very powerful men. Putin protected those that swore loyalty to him, and those who didn't were either arrested on trumped-up charges or mysteriously killed.
So the most common way to get rid of somebody is to bring them up on embezzlement charges.
Former Russian oil tycoon Mikhail Khodorkovsky has been found guilty of embezzlement.
The Russian tycoon Boris Berezovsky convicted of embezzlement.
A former Russian businessman, he was accused of embezzling money. Nikolai Glushkov. The cause of death is still unexplained.
And what happened to Navalny? He was also charged with embezzlement, unsurprisingly.
With the law on his side, within a decade, Putin insulated himself with the most powerful elements on all sides.
Now look at this. He's got the control of the law, control of the media, control of elections, and control of the powerful business interests. He's really insulated himself very well. Now, Navalny had this idea that he was going to take on Putin, and it's not going to go well for him, but I want you to see how this plays out.
And it was all held together by corruption.
Corruption is a structural feature of the regime. It's not an inefficiency of the regime. It's not a drag on the regime. It's the core of the regime.
That's right. The corruption holds all these pieces together. Now, it also makes business and the military and everything else terribly inefficient, but it holds his power base in place. Now, Navalny's going to take that on.
To a report, over $400 billion were lost to corruption in Russia between 2000 and 2008. But because Putin controlled the media, much of it was hidden, until a young lawyer named Alexei Navalny found a way to change that. In 2006, Navalny started a blog where he wrote about corruption. In 2010, he wrote that at least $4 billion was stolen out of the state-owned transportation company Transneft, and he had proof. He had bought stock in the company and was able to access internal documents that plainly showed how government money was funneled into offshore accounts owned by Transneft officials.
And Navalny was a lawyer, so he knew what he was talking about.
And this was just the beginning. Navalny soon published investigations on corrupt oil schemes, land deals, and fraud at state-owned banks by Russian oligarchs and politicians. By posting straight to his blog, Navalny was circumventing state media to reveal corruption and expose Putin's regime in a way that Russians had never seen before, all while making a name for himself. In 2011, huge protests erupted when Putin's party won a majority in parliament.
And this is really odd because the people in Russia tend to be apolitical for the most part, but he's able to rile them up, and that's really interesting and quite a threat to Putin.
Reports of voter fraud. It was the largest wave of demonstrations Putin's regime had ever faced, and Navalny was one of the main organizers. State television ignored the protests, even as police arrested more than 1,000 people and went after the organizers.
That's what state media tends to do whenever there's bad news, like the drone attack over Moscow. It was bad news, so it got very little play, even though it was a huge event.
Over time, he developed a talent for organizing protests and gained a following. Then in 2013, he ran for mayor of Moscow.
Я верю, что мы можем все изменить.
State TV didn't give his campaign any airtime, so he relied on rallies, online crowdsourcing, and an army of volunteers to spread the word. But just as he was gaining momentum, police arrested him on trumped-up charges of embezzlement and sentenced him to 5 years in jail. Navalny was eventually released on bail and didn't win the election, but he went on to finish second place. He continued to expose corruption through his YouTube videos, like this one in 2017 on the extreme wealth of Putin's ally Dmitry Medvedev.
Полёская дача, горная резиденция, родовое гнездо в Курской области, агробизнес там же, дома на Рублевке, вина...
Hey, Rublevka, remember that? We knew about that just recently. Isn't that interesting?
Виноградники, старинные особняки.
It reached millions and sparked another round of protests. At the same time, Navalny was running for office again, this time against Putin for president. Predictably, the regime struck back and disqualified him based on previous embezzlement charges, further revealing just how rigged Russia's laws and elections were. But in 2020, Navalny found a way to take on the whole electoral system. He called it smart voting. Instead of letting the opposition vote splinter among several dummy candidates, Navalny identified one candidate and urged people to vote for the same one. even if they were backed by Putin's regime.
Now that was a very clever move for him to do that, to try to befuddle the system. So he's a threat, and he's figuring out how to make Putin's life very miserable. And it's not going to go well for him.
And it terrifies the Kremlin.
While Putin's favorability ratings were slipping because of a struggling economy. That made Navalny a threat, and it explains why he was poisoned possibly more than once. After the Siberia attack, Navalny recovered in a German hospital where he miraculously survived. A few months later, he went back to his investigations. Then in January, he returned to Russia, knowing he'd be arrested. Police met him at the airport and charged him with violating the parole from his 2014 embezzlement case. But while detained, his team released another video, this one attacking Putin directly.
Самый секретный дворец в России. Дворец Путина под Геленджиком.
Okay, so this video about Putin's Palace was put out as well, and I'm going to show you a video about Putin's Palace. If you want to see the rest of the Vox video, and I would suggest that you do that, look in the comments below. Now, he returned knowing that he was going to go to jail, but he was going to jail for these trumped-up charges, and he's in jail for those trumped-up charges right now, and he could get an extended sentence. And this is where the kangaroo comes in. But I want to show you the video about Putin's Palace first. This is from DW. DW is a German broadcast service, and they're going to talk about just how elaborate Putin's palace is. On paper, Putin makes $140,000 a year, but this is where he lives, one of his palaces.
And to a sprawling palace complex with its own amphitheater, a tea house, and a helipad. Who owns it? Well, Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has released a 2-hour video investigation into the complex, saying the palace was built for Russian President Vladimir Putin using taxpayer money. The Kremlin has denied those allegations. The video was posted by Navalny's team 2 days after he was jailed upon returning to Russia.
They're calling it the new Versailles. In the 2-hour video, Navalny explains how his anti-corruption foundation had been able to film the property from above for the first time, using a drone. He says there's nothing like it anywhere in the country. Without exaggeration, it is the most secretive and guarded facility in Russia. It isn't a country house or a residence. It's an entire city, or rather a kingdom. It has impregnable fences, its own harbour, guards, church, its own checkpoint, no-fly zone, and even its own border point. It is a separate state inside Russia. Details of the palace were leaked by construction workers said to be shocked at its opulence. Among its many features, this green mound is reported to house an underground ice hockey rink.
And I think it's an excellent site for a drone attack. Not to blow it up, just to drop yellow and blue paint on it, to make a political statement that they can reach you there.
This is an amphitheatre. Navalny points out the exit of a tunnel used by Putin to access the beach. He also emphasises not just the size of the palace, but also the vastness of the area it occupies, which is 3.5 times the size of the nearest city. The Kremlin rejects all the claims, calling them nonsensical. These are groundless allegations. They are nonsense and a compilation of fabrications and nothing else. That's the principal goal of such documents, such pseudo-investigations. It's a scam. We want all
So if Dmitry Peskov said it, you know that it is actually true.
the people taking into account the big number of views.
Okay, so that's what got him in hot water. So he got the embezzlement charge for being a thorn in Putin's side, and then when he came back, he was arrested. He's now in jail, and he released this video. So he's still quite a threat. He's such a threat to Vladimir Putin that he's held in solitary confinement. So while he's in jail, he's had time on his hands, and he's been trolling his the prison authorities. Alexei Navalny, Russia's most famous opposition leader, on Friday shared letters showing how he has poked fun at prison authorities for several months with a host of bizarre requests for example, a kimono, a beetle, and even a kangaroo. The requests were turned down by the maximum security penal colony. He says when you're in a punishment cell and don't have much entertainment, you can always amuse yourself by corresponding with the prison administration, Navalny said. Navalny serving a combined sentences of 11.5 years for fraud and contempt of court on charges charges that he says were trumped up to silence him. Navalny asked for a number of things, including, variously, a bottle of moonshine, cheap tobacco, a kimono, and a black belt. He also asked for a megaphone to be given to a mentally ill convict in a cell opposite so that he could shout even louder, and for prison authorities to award a 10th dan, that's the 10th degree black belt, in karate to a prisoner who apparently killed a man with his bare hands. Both requests were refused. In fact, the prison actually got back to him and said, "We don't have the authority to award a black belt," which is absolutely fascinating that they would say that. The question of awarding Eastern martial arts qualifications is not handled by the administration, the prison wrote back on April 28th. In response to Navalny's request for a permit to keep a kangaroo, the prison wrote, "The animal identified in your request relates to the double-crested marsupial. Your request is left without satisfaction." Now, the reason that he asked for a kangaroo was because there is a section that allows prisoners to have a pet, and so he asked for a kangaroo. He asked for a massage chair to be given to an unidentified squad leader, suggesting that it might reduce stress. The prison wrote coldly that massage chairs were not provided. Navalny inquired about the names of the guard dogs. The prison said that it could not give them such information because, he could use that to somehow escape. They have no sense of humor. His inquiry about whether he needed a permit to keep a beetle was met with a refusal. "The insect identified by your request belongs to the animal kingdom," the prison said in a May 3 letter. Okay, so that's Navalny. He's an interesting guy, somebody to keep an eye on because he was powerful, circumvented Putin's elaborate, corrupt installation in order to actually poke holes in what Putin had considered impenetrable. So I hope that helps you understand some context, and I hope the kangaroo angle helped you get here so that you could understand just how Russia works. If this video was helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing. Thank you for doing those things. Thank you for the coffees. Thank you for listening to me this far, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.